Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank, episode number 45. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'm going to be hosting for you today, and we've got both of the boys on the line, both of the Windmill Slams. Teld is here with us, as well as Chris back on for a mainline episode. We've had some great guests with Mop Beeble and Persian filling in a little bit, but Chris, it's good to have you back, and Teld, it's always good to have you here.
Thanks, man. I haven't recorded with you guys in like 6 weeks, have I?
It was the Tarkir preview review. You were with us for the Tarkir review, and then you had to sit out the last 3 episodes, I think.
Yeah, things just kind of lined up that way.
Yeah, Teld said some really dirty things about you while you were gone, but
I'm a dirty bird.
Go back and listen to them.
They're probably all true.
Well, it's glad to have you back.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, we get the nice sardonic undertones of Chris's opinions about Magic the Gathering cards. But we knew Chris was coming back, and I asked, hey, Chris, what is something you want to actually talk about, since we've had our time with just myself and Teld, and he mentioned, obviously, let's talk about black cards. Very Chris thing to do. Let's talk about black cards in Cube.
I'm having my druthers here.
Yeah, which I kind of half knew you were going to say something along those lines, so it's Aristocrats or black cards or what, but yeah, we're going to, I guess this is kind of a mini series. It's not really meant to be a fully fleshed out series, but we talked not too long ago, I want to say episode 37 or something like that. We did an evolution of white, where we talked about kind of where white was at in higher power level cubes 8, 9, 10 years ago, and how it has evolved to where it's at now. And we're going to do the same thing with black here. So when we talk about the evolution of black, we don't necessarily mean alpha black, alpha beta black, or anything like that. We're just talking about when we started our cube 5-6 years ago now, where it's at now versus where it is at then. What does black look like in cube these days, and how has it evolved in places like Vintage Cube, for example? What is black doing these days that it wasn't doing before? What is it better at? Where can it go from there? So that's kind of the game plan.
The obvious intention for black's original color identity is Chains of Mephistopheles. Obviously. So we're gonna be using that as our origin point, a card that was clearly designed by someone who had just done a massive bump of meth.
Chains of This is going to be all Chains of Mephistopheles awards and Lord of the Pits cards and stuff.
When I read that card, I just picture the designer so high by himself, he's staring in the bathroom mirror, just muttering, and that's how they came up with the rules text.
It's one of those cards where reading the Oracle text makes it worse. It's just so down the. Have you ever looked at the Oracle text on Animate Dead? It's just come on.
Oh, you're a Magic fan? Name every single word on Chains of Mephistopheles.
Nope, I'm out. Not a Magic fan.
The worst part was there was a brief moment in Legacy where that card was a meta staple. And so you had
that's heinous.
You had to look at it. It was a nightmare.
Yeah, because it ganks brainstorms super hard. It just stops all the ponders and brainstorms and stuff. Yeah, that's when I first came into Magic. People were actually playing Chains in Legacy, maybe Vintage, I don't know, but I haven't heard anybody playing Chains of Mephistopheles these days. The only time I even hear it referenced is when we talk about it in regards to overly complex Magic the Gathering cards. So if you want more Chains of Mephistopheles, make sure you stay tuned to our 2025 in review episode 7 months from now, 6 months from now. What month are we in? I don't know.
I don't know. Okay, so check this out. So on the Gatherer, for whatever reason, God, the Gatherer looks so dated. You can rate cards, you can give them a rating, and out of 87 votes, Chains of Mephistopheles has a 4.534 out of 5. Very precise.
Okay, so a lot of people rated it 5, but there's a couple people in there who, I would eat at a 4-point-something restaurant, so I guess that's approved.
Yeah, I think it's approved. I think it's mostly getting the votes for the art.
The people love Chains of Mephistopheles. We heard it here first. Or you heard it on Gatherer.com, which use Scryfall, people. Use Scryfall. Yeah, let Gatherer die, please. Just let it die in a hole. Yep. Okay, let's go ahead and knock out some housekeeping first. So remember, the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank podcast is to join the Discord server, come draft with us, give us your feedback, so on and so forth. It's a great place to hang out with like-minded individuals and talk about Cube, Retail Limited, and all things Magic. You can talk about Final Fantasy cards and how disappointed they've been so far. You can find links to our Discord server wherever you're listening to this podcast. We host tons of schedule drafts throughout the week, including our Peasant Cube on Saturday nights, the mainline Jank Diver Cube on Sunday nights. We have F&M style drafts on Fridays where our players vote on a cube to play. And we have various guest cubes created by members of our server throughout the week. So there's always plenty to do. In fact, I think right now, as we're recording, there are people drafting some sort of like Mishra's Bauble cube with like 69 copies of Mishra's Bauble in it or something like
and
that.
And I'll tell you how much it is I care about you all that I'm here instead of drafting that cube.
Does sound like a very Teld cube. Chris, we did Mishra's Bauble as a single card discussion on our last episode.
So. Nice.
Socials, you can find us on Twitter at JankDiverGaming. You can find us on YouTube at, youtube.com/@JankDiverGaming or something like that. You can find Teld streaming on twitch.tv/TeldTalks, but the best place to find us is on Discord, so click that Discord link wherever you're listening to this and come join the community. Before we get into a discussion about the evolution of black cards, we're actually going to have a single card discussion about black cards, and we waffled between a couple, and we landed on one that I guess I'll let Chris mostly speak to the card itself and read the card and everything, but we landed on a card that's not something that really has held up extremely well in Modern Magic, but something that's been in our personal cube, the mainline Jank Diver Cube, for I think the entirety of the time we've had it. It's just barely held on these days. It used to be fantastic, but that card is a Rankle, Master of Pranks. And Chris, do you want to go ahead and read the card and walk us through kind of like the play patterns with it and, you know, kind of the successes that we've had with it in our own cube?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, if you hear any banging in the background, anytime I give Tank a bone or anything that is in some way made out of something that used to be alive, he throws it around like it's like something that's running from him and then hunts it. So yeah, he likes them, but, you know, and every 6 months I'm like, oh, maybe I'll get him when he really likes these. And then like 2 days in, I'm like, this is why you don't get him this stuff anymore. But in any case, so Rankle, Master of Pranks, former profile picture on Discord. 4 mana, 2 black for a 3/3 with flying and haste. When it deals combat damage to a player, choose any number. Each player discards a card, each player loses 1 life and draws a card, each player sacrifices a creature, and then, like, as I mentioned, you can choose any number of these, right? So you can do all 3. This card has aged a lot, right, in terms of how excited I am to pick it, but I will say it is a testament to how powerful for the time a number of those original Eldraine rares were, that they're still, like, hanging around and are still, like, solid in their slots, like Bone Crusher Giant. What's the blue?
Great Henge,
Great Henge. Yeah, well, Henge we actually ended up cutting just because it's so obnoxious. Yeah. But in any case, like what's great about this card is it's a 3/3 flying haste. You know, nowadays would probably be like a 5/5, but it starts getting in for damage immediately. It is a sacrifice outlet when you want it to be. It is a draw engine when you want it to be. Although, you know, obviously it feeds both players. It's also a solid discard outlet. Rankle these days, rather than just kind of being an all-star, is the type of card that is fine a big percentage of the time, and then sometimes it just completely locks your opponent out of the game by emptying their hand, or especially if they're like a green player, like a mid-range green player who's not playing a lot of dorks, just the probability that even though they choose the creature, that they're sacrificing it, the likelihood that it's going to be worth more than whatever you're feeding to Rankle is pretty high. One thing I do like about this card is, and we're seeing more of this in black, is once upon a time, like, black cards that sacrificed creatures or had sack synergies, they made them baseline awful, right? Because they would, like, sing with the synergy, so they didn't want to give you good cards that also did the thing. Rankle is a really early sort of prototypical example of that type of card where it does just beat down in the air, but it also has, you know, Swiss Army knife functionality and sort of the sacrifice synergies going on with it as well. I have no doubt that in the next few years they will print something vaguely similar that's probably stronger. But this card's a long time favorite of ours. But one of the issues I think with black 4-drops in Cube is they're either absurd, like Yawgmoth or Shieldred, or they're mediocre, or they do something fairly specific that's really powerful against like a particular archetype more than against others. So we have access to a lot of black 4-drops, but weirdly enough, we've had some difficulty maintaining a black 4-drop list that kind of falls into our acceptable band of power while not shafting a specific archetype. Like, I think Kalitas is a fine card for our power level, but it's just so good against aggro. It's just not something that we're willing to play. So
Yeah, I think the only one for me that really has stuck there is like Hostile Investigator has been a great addition,
Yeah.
where it just kind of fits that perfect power level of good value, decent body, but doesn't completely break the game in half.
And Soren the Mirthless is in that category as well.
yeah, Soren's still a solid card. It's not a card that like I'll see in a pack like pick 6 and feel like I have to pick it. It's just like it's a
Right.
solid. You're like you'll wheel it if you're in the right deck.
Okay, Hostile Investigator is more like that. You're probably supposed to like get excited that it's their pick 6, but
Yes,
we're not talking about that.
no. I feel you. Investigator's good. Investigator's definitely good.
Teld, where are you at on the old master of pranks here these days? Do you ever play black? Have you ever played a black deck before?
Not the kind of I don't play this kind of deck very often. I think Rankle is kind of a victim of circumstance in that I'm a little lower on Rankle than even Chris. I don't think I can't see myself ever drafting a deck where I put Rankle in it. Not that you shouldn't, just that the kind of decks I tend to draft don't want a Rankle.
Yeah, it's not a Teld card.
Yeah. So Rankle has a few major issues in my mind. Firstly, is being like a 4-mana card that I have to commit pre-combat that I also must attack with. Like, you don't block with Rankle, so if you can't attack with it, it's not very good.
Right.
And then it's also pretty variable. Like, if you're against a white deck, frequently Rankle doesn't do very much. Sometimes it doesn't do much against blue decks because of the aforementioned, like, I'm tapping out before combat.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's very good against them. You know, you can hit them and like hit the cards out of people's hands, and like they'll play a few individually large creatures, but blue also plays a lot of flyers. So I think Rankle is not the most consistent card. When it's good, it's really good though. You get a lot of really broken setups with like Jadar or the new Sinkhole Surveyor's another card that you can do this with, where you're just making these super cheap disposable bodies.
The Rat King.
And Rankle is trading them. The Lord Skitter is a good example, where you're trading like a part of a card for an entire card. And especially against these control decks, like stuff like Scarab God, for example, and if they slam that and your follow-up is Rankle with a sack piece, and you get to do that and discard a card from both players' hands. It can be super powerful. It's just not the kind of card I personally like. It sort of puts you in a deck that I think is a little questionable. The best home I think currently for it is probably Black-Red. We haven't seen as much of that deck since we cut Goblin Bombardment, just because that card was super messed up, but was also one of the big draws to that deck. But we have seen a couple of people have now played it. So I think that's more of an issue if people just aren't drafting the deck rather than it's bad, because it looks like the lineup of cards is fine. I'm of the opinion Black-Red is fine but underdrafted at the moment, and people just took Goblin Bombardment, getting rid of like all the free wins that card gives you. People just assumed that the deck was dead, and I don't think that's a fair look of the deck. But Rankle's, the other good deck for Rankle would be like Black-White. And I think, that it's a Mardu card, right? It's a Mardu Spectrum card.
Yes.
It's doing that sort of mid-rangey aggressive black sack thing. But you really need these parity breaking, your Adelines, your Jadars, your Lord Skaters. You need these cards that can churn out quite a bit of extra free bodies. You don't have to have a ton of those, but you do need a few of them, I think. You don't ever really want to sack like a bat off Sanguine Evangelist if you can help it, right? You really want to sack something that you get free value out of, as opposed to giving up a real portion of a card. Because I think when Rankle's breaking parity like that, it is quite an annoying, obnoxious card.
Yeah, 100%. I guess I should start by saying, like, Rankle is at a power level in contemporary Magic now where I will not put this in a deck unless it is, like, screamingly aggressive, which is the type of deck I like to play. But, like, I want this to be, like, one of my 2 4-drops. Like, I want to be playing a deck that can, like, just spit up its hand. So when I'm choosing the discard mode, more often than not, you're dropping a card and I'm not. Like, if you can break parity either by, like, emptying your hand, having resources in your graveyard like Bloodghast and things of that nature, and start churning with it, it can be really, really good. But one of the other reasons I think that Rankle has started to suffer a little bit is when it came out, creatures were smaller, and you wouldn't think that would matter necessarily because of us flying, but the flyers have gotten bigger as well. I'm not bringing this up to like meme on it or kick off a conversation about it, but like if your opponent triggers Ledger Shredder one time, it just blocks Rankle all day. And as you mentioned, if Rankle can't get through for damage, it's not a very good card. So it's getting bricked quicker than it used to. and you really have to build around it. This is not like a card you throw in your random Golgari good cards deck. It just does not belong there.
Yeah, it's also a testament to how good some of the generic black fours are that you mentioned, because even if you went out of your way to support a deck where Rankle would theoretically be like the top end card that you absolutely want, if that cube also just has Shieldred the Apocalypse and Grief in it or whatever, like you should just take Shield. Like no matter how good Rankle would be for your deck, Shieldred is just a better card on average, like for any deck. So
big piece of the reason that we cut it.
Yeah, which is a shame, because I do think Rankle's a very cool design that promotes like finding synergies and stuff like that. You know, being able to break parity on the discard is something that we found a lot harder to do in our environment. It's part of the reason like Liliana of the Veil has dropped off so significantly, is that it used to be the case that like the discard was setting up something for you while also disrupting your opponent, but sometimes you get to do that, a lot of times you don't, unfortunately. And Rankle just gets bricked a little bit too often. A lot of reach creatures these days too, like on top of the flyers, the stupid 2 mana 3 power reach creatures that we get all the time.
You green.
Like, so Rankle's one of the like last remaining figments of the early days of the Jank Diver Gaming Cube. Every now and then you will find an opponent who has a Rankle and it completely hoses you. You just don't see that often. So it's probably out the door as soon as we find a suitable 4-drop that's not super busted. But like Chris said, we have trouble with that. The 4s seem to be either Shieldreds or Ravenous Chupacabras and Gaunties or whatever. And it's just like there's so little in between.
Same issue we're having with the green 6s.
Yeah, exactly.
One other comment I did want to make, if I'm hearing you correctly, Teld, people are a little bit down on the deck, but I will say the last time I played, which I don't play a whole lot anymore, but the last time I played, which was not very long ago, I absolutely cruised to the final. Well, not cruised. I made it through to the finals in pretty convincing fashion with a mono black aggressive deck, and I just happened to get the shit kicked out of me by an opposing Boros aggro deck, and that's not a good matchup for a black aggressive deck. It's just not.
Yeah, we had a black-red aggressive deck that trophied a few weeks ago. It was actually splashing for the Zergo we added, but it was definitely more 3s heavy than the old versions of black-red aggro we had seen that were just a pile of 1s and 2s.
Right.
So you could make the argument that it was a little more mid-rangey, but I'm going to argue that any deck playing Rock Curse, Rakshasha, and Bloodghast is by definition an aggro deck.
Along those same lines, I think there's a common perception with our regular drafters that black-white is like one of the worst decks to put together. And it's not that I disagree with them. Like, black-white doesn't necessarily perform very well on a regular basis, which is theoretically like the type of deck where Rankle will be really good. But every time I see black-white in action, I feel like it's always misbuilt or it's really hard to draft correctly, because I think the best thing you can do in black-white is just go full Aristocrats. Like every single Blood Artist you can get, the Zahur, the black-white card is really good. But I think those decks really, every now and then you just have to slot in cards that don't really support the overall theme, and it makes it look worse. So like Zoraline, for example, the Bat, I think that card sucks in black-white. Or it's not a bad black-white card, but it's bad in what I think is the best version of black-white, which is the all-in Aristocrats decks, and it's just really hard to get that version of black-white to come together, which is where Rankle would perform at its best, but you just don't see black-white being drafted as all-in. It's usually like 60% Aristocrats and then 40% aggro or something, and like it's just always two themes kind of meshing together poorly. So I don't necessarily agree black-white is like a really bad deck. I do think it's very hard to draft, requires a lot of very specific pieces, and also just doesn't really appeal to our normal drafters anyway. So
right.
There's a lot of things working against it there, which in turn means that a card like Rankle doesn't even show up when theoretically you think someone at the table would have the deck where it should show up.
Yeah, I think those Aristocrat decks also tend to be critical mass decks, and we mentioned a lot of our gamers like to play control decks, and like when your control deck can just pick apart your synergies and keep you from establishing that critical mass, it can be difficult to get it to work, which is why I think Black-Red ultimately ends up being a more consistent quote-unquote Aristocrats deck, even though I think generally you're playing very little in that fashion. But it is playing the token producers and like going very low to the ground aggressive and like trying to get payoff that way. I think the more consistent aggressive plan works better than trying to do the Rube Goldberg machine.
For sure. Why don't we go ahead and get into the episode here then?
Yep.
We'll let Rankle rest for a little bit. So we're
He's
talking
always
about the
resting.
evolution.
Have you seen that stone throne he's chilling on?
Oh yeah, Rankle's straight chilling, dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, I just noticed how big his toes are, or maybe it's his feet. He's got big feet for some reason.
He's got big, freaky Velociraptor feet. Yeah.
You
anyway,
know what they say about big feet.
He sure does. They wear big shoes.
Yeah. Let's just say it weighs him down and keep moving.
The evolution of Black and Cube, eh? So, I guess just to kick this off, I'm going to do something very similar to what we did when we talked about the evolution of White, which is just to kind of like go back in memory a little bit. And if you guys have any other things to add on here that maybe I blanked on, I didn't do a really expansive list, but to go back in time and just kind of like pull out some of the things that like come to mind when it's like, this is what Black was doing back in the day, quote unquote, like, 5 to 10 years ago or something like that, and then see like how it stacks up versus what Black is doing these days. And the first thing that came to mind to me when I really like thought back, like, early vintage Cube or something like that, was the Suicide Black identity of Black, which if you guys remember, Black and Cube used to play things like Carnophage and Sangrophage or whatever, like these really 1 mana 2/2s or 2 mana 3/3s with these downsides that like shot you for damage every turn. And the idea was like, these are above rate creatures that are going to beat down and kill your opponent fast, but you're going to take a bunch of damage. And it like all kind of compiled to the point where like you would deal like 10, 12 damage to yourself during the game, but the hope was that your creatures outsized everything and beat down your opponents faster than they would kill you. And you see a lot of that in Black, paying life for advantages. It's kind of one of the key hallmarks of Black cards. So we've got a lot of that, right? We actually do have a lot of things in our own cube that, ask you to pay life, whether it's a Night's Whisper or a Sinkhole Summoner, or even like the MDFC land that requires 3 life to come in untapped. There's actually quite a bit of that floating around Black, but I don't know if I would really describe even Black aggro as like Suicide Black these days, no. Right? Like that identity is largely just like mostly gone, I think, or at least like as an archetype, as something that like you should expect. I think that's mostly just like a figment of old Magic.
I generally agree. Like the Carnophage, especially when I first started playing Pauper, I want to say Carnophage aggro was still a deck that I think I'm imagining this, but it might have even still been in the Vintage Cube when I started playing Magic.
It was when I started 10 years ago. Carnophage was in the Vintage Cube.
Okay, I'm not crazy. Yeah, like that's how much things have changed. Like can you imagine if they put Carnophage in the Vintage Cube? Like, no, it's insane.
Well, the upside of it was it's a 1 mana 2/2, which is like sure, give me Isamaru, yeah. I guess, but like with downside these days, they just don't put downsides on cards very often at all, let alone just like the downside compared to the upside of just being like an overstated vanilla creature. That's just like an embarrassing card design these days. Like I said, I wouldn't describe anything as Suicide Black. I think you do end up in these decks sometimes where like you do have a lot of cards that are vying for your own life total for various advantages and stuff, but like that's just kind of like Black's slice of the color pie more than it is, I think, like an archetypal identity like it used to be.
I do like they still sometimes print these kind of effects that are maybe not the same, but something like Archfiend of the Dross comes to mind. The 4 mana 6/6 from Phyrexia All-Be-One that has flying, and it comes in with oil counters, and every turn it loses them, and when you lose all the oil counters, you die. And so it's kind of doing the same thing. It's not costing you life total, but it puts you on this, this card has to kill your opponent or else you're going to lose the game, right? And so they still sometimes flirt with this sort of design, but it's usually not done in the Speed Demon's another one, right? The card from Aether Drift that has start your engines, and you lose at the end step, you draw cards and lose X life, where X is your speed. Like if that card sits in play for a couple of turns, you're gonna die.
Mm-hmm. There's Darkstar Augur as well. The through line between all the stuff that we mentioned, though, Sorin, Night's Whisper, Speed Demon, Darkstar Augur, is generally speaking, instead of giving you like overstated creature that hurts you, quote unquote Suicide Black cards these days, you're often trading life for card advantage, so you can keep piling on pressure, which I think is a more interesting quote unquote Suicide Black concept than just being like, here's a here's an Isamaru that bites you.
Yeah, or they give you outs to the downside, right? Like Caustic Bronco is a good example where, like, at some point you actually start turning the disadvantage as damage to your opponent, or, Soren makes a lifelink in flyers by design to kind of make up for the card draw and stuff like that. So there's a lot more of that and less of, like, actual factual Dark Confidant. Here's a really dorky, dumb creature.
We are getting Dark Confidant into Standard.
we are getting Standard Dark Confidant, yeah. Which is hilarious because Bronco exists at a lower rarity, but whatever. Okay, so Suicide Black, not really much of a thing. Control support. My opinion is that Black is pretty much almost exactly the same as it's always been as a control, like, support color, because the Wraths, like, maybe Season of Loss is worth talking about separately, but Damnation, Toxic Deluge, these were cards that existed 10 years ago, and all of the Doomblades, like, the Doomblades have gotten slightly better. Like, we're playing Infernal Grasp now instead of actual Doomblade. You know, it does come with a little bit of a downside, going back to that Suicide Black thing, but, like, Doomblades are Doomblades, and it's not like they've gotten significantly better over 10 years. So, yeah, I mean, do you guys agree? Black is kind of like the same control color it's
Pretty
kind
much.
of always been.
Yeah, the Doomblades have evolved. More of the Doomblades that they print now also hit, like, they cost you something, but they also hit walkers, which is a concession to the fact that they started printing way too many walkers at a certain point. But yeah, broadly speaking, I mean, I think the best only kills creatures Doomblade in our cube is probably Go for the Throat. Right, and then
no, it's Fatal Push, but, like, if you're talking about, like, kills everything,
no,
yeah, sure.
Well, yeah. By Doomblades, like, I'm thinking of your traditional cost 2. Fatal Push is almost certainly the best black removal spell in the cube. Blot Out is definitely the worst.
Notice the ones that cost lower mana are better. I know this is a shocker to people, but 3 mana removal is where things get a little clunky.
Well, it's not like it's gotten better. Like, I don't know, where do you go from Infernal Grasp, right? It feels like that kind of, like, set a bar for, like, can Doomblades really even get better than that? So I don't know how much we should even expect. I don't know if I would say Bitter Triumph is... I think it's in the exact same category. I don't think it's, like, better than Infernal Grasp.
You could make Infernal Grasp better by just removing the lose 2 life.
Yeah, but, like, would we expect that at any point? That would be, like, pretty wild to do that. I guess that's the only way you power creep it.
I think it'll cost black the first time, but I think we're due for it.
Yeah, I could see it being black. And then they printed the one in Bloomborough with the really cool owl art.
Fell.
Just fell. Fell is awesome. Sorcery is a steep price to pay for a controlling deck, but yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to mention the edicts too. Edicts are always going to be in that sphere of, like, tier 2 removal because of just by virtue of, like, they have bad matchups. But there has been a conscious attempt to make edicts better. Like, it used to be you'd play literally Sudden Edict, Diabolic Edict, and stuff like that. It was just 1 or 2 mana, opponent sacks a creature. But now there's a lot more control over it with things like Shieldred's Edict, which lets you, like, choose what gets sacked. Or, Blot Out's not a good card at 3 mana, but that being able to, like, the edicts that hit your opponent's most expensive things is trying to, like, kind of skirt the, like, downside of edicts a little bit. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there. I think there's still a lot of room to go before they get in Doomblade territory. But yeah, black removal for the most part across sweepers and single target removal is very similar to how it's always been as a control support color. Hand disruption, I think, is largely the same. I mean, same question, like, as far as, like, power creep and Infernal Grasp, like, I would be shocked if they printed, like, a better Thoughtseize, like Thoughtseize that doesn't lose life or something like that. So the hand disruption that we had 10 to 15 years ago is largely still the hand disruption we have today.
That's still all we're playing, right? I mean, if you count Inquisition of Kozilek is ancient, Duress is ancient. We're playing Mind Spike because we like it better than Duress, speaking of cards that cost you life. But it's basically a Duress variant. I mean, yeah, these hand disruption designs are very old. Yeah,
we haven't had unless you count, like, Hopeless Nightmare or something like that, but that's a synergy card more than it is, like, a true hand disruption card.
Yeah, I mean, they did print Cruel Claws Heist, which is seeing some standard and I think Pioneer play. Not a ton, but it is seeing a little bit. So, I mean, they are experimenting with it, but I do expect we'll never get something better than Thoughtseize, partly for the fact that Thoughtseize is such a despised card, right? Like, the universal sort of thoughts on hand discard is pretty negative, and they don't seem to be trying to push the boundaries on those sort of effects the same way that they do Doomblades, where we regularly see better ones. We just don't see good or even playable hand discard all that often. And I'm going to be real, I wouldn't be surprised moving forward to see Magic take on some of Yu-Gi-Oh's aspects, where hand disruption becomes more taboo. I don't think we'll ever go the full Yu-Gi-Oh! Where, like, hand discard doesn't exist, right? Almost all the cards that let you look at your opponent's hand in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are banned. But I would not be surprised, given how popular they are in constructed decks and how generally powerful they are and how much they generally are disliked by the player base. I would not be surprised if we generally see them get pulled back in terms of how often or how powerful we see them.
I wouldn't be surprised either, because it has that same, less so, but it has that same kind of like player sentiment as land destruction, where like people just hate playing against land destruction so much, and Wizards recognizes that, so they don't print as much land destruction. But at the same time, like, as much as I hate getting thought seized ever in any format, like there have been periods of time in Magic constructed formats in Cube where the only reason black was playable at all is because it had access to Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Duress, right? Like, the only way it could play a fair game against your Force of Wills and, you know, all sorts of stuff was being able to disrupt early with the hand disruption.
Yeah, there's been times in constructed formats where the only reason the format was playable was because of hand discard. Yeah. So I doubt we'll ever see them get rid of it, but I do expect we'll see them be a little more hesitant to print really premium ones, right?
I guess Grief is probably a card worth mentioning here, right?
Well,
Because that's a pretty brutal hand disruption card. This is when you start comboing it with other stuff.
Yeah, and then that's the exact kind of card where like the player sentiment on that card is so unbelievably negative that even if it wasn't one of the best things to be doing, I think they would be overwhelming pressure to remove it from formats because people just don't want to play it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what do you guys think of? Okay, random designer brain hat on for 2 seconds, and then we can move on. But you know that there was an uncommon in Blue Burrow, the Thought Monitor Lizard or whatever. It's a 3-mana 2/2. When it enters, your opponent discards a card, but if you dealt damage to him that turn, you actually get to just Thoughtseize their hand instead.
It has Menace too, I think.
Yeah, it has Menace, 3-mana 2/2 Menace, kind of like a Virus Beetle, but that was an uncommon, so like if we really wanted to bump that up to rare, do you think you could see a 2-mana version of that card that's like a 2-mana 2/1 Virus Beetle, but if you dealt damage to him, you Thoughtseize him instead? Like, that feels like it would push into very powerful hand disruption territory.
I think that would be fucking brutal if there was a deck that had access to like good black 1-drops. Because if you're on the play and you have like if you have like 8 1-drops and you have like 4 copies of the card that you just mentioned, like you're gonna turn to
you chain them together,
Thoughtseize your opponent like a bunch, right? What I think I would be maybe more comfortable with is if they printed a creature at the exact same CMC, but at rare they push it from a stat perspective a little harder.
3/3 Menace instead of 2/2 or something like that.
Yeah, like a 3/3 Menace instead of a 2/2 or something like that. Like, I think you could make it rare, give it a stat bump, or like, I don't know, maybe an additional keyword. Maybe 2/2 Menace Death Touch would be a little too insane, just because of how uncomfortable it is to block 2-power Death Touch creatures with Menace. That's such a brutal combination. But
yeah, wasn't there a ninja from Kamigawa that like Thoughtseize, you could remove its counter to like Thoughtseize your opponent or something like that? Biden Palm Ninja, I think, is the name of the card.
Yeah, one of them let you like cast a card for free from their hand or something, and then the other one, yeah, I think it was Biting Palm that you got to Thoughtseize them.
This is all to say, like, hand disruption is never going to get better than Thoughtseize, but there's probably still wiggle room on like the tier 1.5 hand disruption stuff. Aristocrats, that's a big part of Black's identity. It's funny because Aristocrats is the type of stuff that exists in cubes of our power level, but once you go up to like Vintage Cube, it's just not even something you even try to do. Because like Teld mentioned, it is a Rube Goldberg style deck. It requires, 3-pronged approach of sack fodder plus sack payoffs plus sacrifice engines and outlets all at once, and they've all got to kind of get going at the same time and stuff like that. So it's always been kind of this fun, cool thing that people enjoy, but at the same time, it's really hard to put together. It requires a lot of cube equity to support it as well. So I guess the question is, where is Aristocrats at now versus where it was back in the day? And I think one of the big things to note is that some of the Aristocrats cards we've gotten over the past year actually contribute to combat now, instead of just being 0/1 Blood Artists or 1/1 Zulaport Cutthroats. So
Oh, just wait till we
Yeah.
get to the Final Fantasy spoiler. That format or that set has a bunch of crap in it, and it's got one really, really good card in it.
Yes,
That's it.
Sephiroth is
I
insane.
haven't really been following spoilers, or has it really been disappointing?
It's not. We're not going to get a lot for Cube, and I doubt
Okay.
there's going to be very much for Standard. It's got Commander vibes on it and low power kind of constructed playable type stuff. It's flavor over function, like almost 100%.
Yeah, the short of it, Chris, is that the designs are really slick and cool and innovative, but they are not at the power level you need.
They're not strong. They're not
Gotcha.
strong cards. But Sephiroth is a 3-mana 3/3 with Blood Artist's ability on it, so that's pretty.
It also
And it
draws
doesn't-
cards.
And draws cards, yeah.
Oh, and it can become a 5/5 flyer.
Yeah, that card looks insane. Teld likes to, and I appreciate it, DM me like when there's spoilers going on, and I haven't. My Magic passion has been at kind of a low point recently, which is not a commentary on the game itself or whatever. I've just been dealing with some personal stuff and also obsessed with some other things. But Tim, I think you hit the nail on the head. So like Aristocrats, you're not going to see it in really, really, really high power, which is to say cubes that contain old school combo. Right, because it just sucks into combo, right? If there's no combat happening, then it's just worse into combo than like a red aggro deck that's just going to snowball with prowess creatures really, really hard, right? Because it just doesn't get you dead as fast as aggro does. I think pure Aristocrats is basically dead. Where things are going is they're printing creatures with stats that will hurt your opponent and tangle in combat that also do Aristocrats stuff. So I think original Aristocrats, like old school Aristocrats, was like pretty close to a pure combo deck. Not exactly a pure combo deck, but like pretty close. Whereas what we're starting to see a lot more of now is black aggressive decks contain Aristocrat elements while simultaneously being able to push damage and trade in combat. And I think that's kind of the future of the archetype. It's an aggressive deck with an attrition subplan.
Yeah, so I have a possibly controversial opinion that I don't actually think Aristocrats has been very good at any level of Magic for a very long time. Like what we imagine as Aristocrats, I'm putting the caveat there because obviously like the Cat Oven Mayhem Devil deck and the Yawgmoth combo, like persist Young Wolf, not persisting, Undying Young Wolf style deck has been very good at various points, but I don't think, would we consider either of those like really an Aristocrats deck? Like, I think you can make a case for the Cat Oven deck, but I would just lump both of those into like combo decks, right?
Yeah, they're combo.
And I think the original Aristocrats deck, if you go way, way back to the second Ravnica, Return to Ravnica, that's where the deck got its name, right? There was Falconwrath Aristocrat from Innistrad or Dark Ascension, one of the two, and you had like the sack plan, you had the Boros Reckoner with like the Blasphemous Act, and you could do 13 to your opponent's face. And if you didn't play that deck, it's one of the sweetest standard decks that has ever been cooked up. It was unbelievably cool.
It's a Sam Black deck.
Yeah, I think people have been riding that high for going on, 15 years now. And I really think once you get outside of Peasant, that the Aristocrat stuff falls off relatively quickly. And as you scale up in power, and I think we're seeing that in our own cube, that once you get to where we're at, the Aristocrat cards start feeling pretty weak unless they bring their own stat lines, like Chris said. Like, I consider the gold standard now to be something like Ellis Ilkor. Right, or
Vran.
to Vran to a lesser extent, right? That's the 2-mana 2/2 that deals 2 and gains 2, and I think those cards being able to contribute early into the game, being able to play them on curve without feeling like a moron, like you feel like a chump when you have to play on the rare occasion you have to play Blood Artist on turn 2, and like
it's not a good game.
I've mentioned before that I don't like Blood Artists because it has stats, and I think people, and maybe I phrased it poorly, but I think people have misconstrued that as I don't like Blood Artists because it's not a good 2-drop. And that's not really what I'm saying. It's more that like the card itself is a brick until you get the setup for it. And it is good once you get there, right? The payoff is good. But I think they're just a little too fiddly. They require too many things going on. But I do think the synergies they have, the like mini packages, so stuff like Jadar with Rankle is a very powerful little 2-card package you can put into a deck. Or cards like Lord Skitter plus Ellis Ilkor is like a good engine that you can set up. So I think there's room for the synergies cards, but I think cards like, and we'll get to it later, but cards like Woe Strider really just don't impress anymore. You really need these cards to be doing more. They need to be generating value, more value than Woe Strider is. They need to be generating like more damage. They need to be doing something more. And we're seeing the old guard kind of get phased out. And I'm going to assume Sephiroth is a signal for what we're getting moving forward. And we'll talk about that card more later, probably in the set review or later this episode. But like that card, I think gives optimism if you're the kind of person who likes playing these sort of Rube Goldberg machine decks.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to say, like, Sephiroth kind of, I think, feeds into what I was mentioning earlier, and you touched on as well, which is cards that completely suck as bodies that do the Aristocrats thing. I just don't think that that's going to hold water anymore. I think that they're going to need to be cards that do that type of stuff. Like Marionette Apprentice was a good nod to that, which is the 1/2 Fabricate. That has like Zulaport Cutthroat's text essentially, or it's one-sided Blood Artist. It doesn't count your opponent's creatures because it does gain life, I think. Case in point, like I just want to give a quick shout out to this. Like, get Zulaport Cutthroat out of your cube. Like even if your power level's not like even if your power level's like not particularly high, like Zulaport Cutthroat's not good enough for your cube anymore, in my opinion. But yeah, I think Sephiroth is probably gonna eat Woe Strider and then, you know, have a really bad time in the bathroom later. But I think, yeah, like Woe Strider's probably on the way out.
Yeah, that's another point about the sack outlets here is 10 years ago you used to have a bunch of free sack outlets. If you wanted to do Aristocrat things, you would play Carrion Feeder or Viserys or something like that. And then over like the last 5 or 6 years, they kind of pulled that back because you can do some really busted constructed things when you have free sack outlets. But recently, over the last like year and a half, they've actually started, you know, revisiting free sack outlets again with things like Zahur, for example, and stuff like that. So we are back on the train of getting free sack outlets every now and then, which are really the things you need to make these decks tick anyway. And to Teld's point, like I think I kind of agree that like Aristocrats is not the best thing you can be doing in basically any cube, especially in a power level of ours. Like, it's not the best thing you can be seeding into a black section, but it is interesting and unique for people who like to do that stuff and fiddle around with moving permanents back and forth and token creation and stuff like that. So I personally find it enjoyable to play, whether it's top tier or not. And also, if we were to go through and comb out all of the dedicated Aristocrats pieces and just replace them with more black control mid-range and stuff like that, I think it would make the black section like maybe better, but like significantly less interesting, I think. And then also, like, to our point in the Is It episode that we did recently, like, the same way they design Is It as blue-red spells in every other set, they kind of do red-black sacrifice in literally every other set for limited purposes. So, like, the cards that are coming into the card pool on a regular basis have Aristocrats vibes to them, like all of your Village Rites type stuff and things like that. It's always geared towards limited, but it always kind of plays into this sacrifice space for black. So it's just kind of the majority of what we get anyway for the color.
The way that I look at quote unquote Aristocrats is like I just don't see it as like a pure deck anymore. I just don't think that that's the direction that Magic is heading. The way that I look at it is like, okay, so red aggro has reach in the form of burn, right? Black aggro, as they print cards that do the aristocracy thing while also contribute meaningfully to combat. To me, like, the aristocracy element of your deck is not your plan, it's your reach plan. It's your, I did enough damage to you early that now that I'm sticking this aristocrats piece, like, you can't keep me from killing you. By the way, we might as well just read Sephiroth, right? Because we've mentioned it so many times, and we're talking about cards that do the sacrifice thing will also contribute meaningfully to combat. All right, so it's Sephiroth, Fabled Soldier, notably the big bad from Final Fantasy VII, one of the coolest games ever made.
Spoilers, dude. What's
the hell?
Nothing. Go on.
It's 2 and a black for a 3/3. Whenever it enters or attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, draw a card. So you get, immediate value if you're sacrificing your creature. Draw a card. Notably, it is also a may. So if you're playing this onto an empty board, it does not have to sack itself. I think that that's something they probably would have overlooked in previous design eras of Magic. Whenever another creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So that's literally just Blood Artist's text. And then if this was the 4th time this ability has resolved this term, transform Sephiroth. It transforms into a 5/5 flyer, and then you get an emblem with the Blood Artist ability. So even if this gets removed later, you just have the Blood Artist emblem. And then whenever this attacks, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. If you do, draw that many cards. So This has Blood Artist text on it. I mean, I do realize that 1 additional mana is significant when you're going from a 2 to a 3 drop, but I mean, you're spending 1 more mana to turn Blood Artist into this monster. This is a great card. This is going to be a really, really, really strong card.
Yeah, this feels like got to be like close to forever card territory, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a wide board of cheap crap, like if you're in black-white or even black-red with like the Rabble Master variants, you can just play this pre-combat and swing with all your shitty tokens that will add up to a lot of damage and just be like, I dare you to block anything. Because if you block in such a way that this is not going to transform, you're still going to eat damage from the Blood Artist ability, and you're going to eat damage from all the stuff that you let through. And then if you do block everything in an attempt to clean my board up, like this is just going to flip and murder you. This card seems very powerful to me.
Yeah, this card looks great. I do want to save most of my thoughts for next episode, which is going to be our Final Fantasy review. But like,
yeah, fair play,
fact
fair
that
play.
it does kind of what you want Rankle to be doing, where it bridges that gap between Aristocrats and aggro, where you can take this card early and not necessarily feel like you have to go all in on like sacrifice stuff. But I mean, when was the last time we got literal Blood Artist text on a card like this? It's always been. For years, it's been the Zulaport Cutthroat one-sided text, but the actual straight-up Blood Artist anything dies text, that's pretty crazy.
They nailed the art, too.
We'll talk more about it, but like the Blood Artist having Blood Artist text is the reason it's still in our cube, right? The fact that it makes all the trades so bad.
It's why Blood Artist is passable and Zulaport Cutthroat sucks.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's probably enough on Aristocrats. Somebody else here posted or wrote down a couple more of the kind of traditional black spheres that we're used to for the color.
Yeah, so that was me. Just wanted to kind of go through these a little quicker since these are more like specific kind of deck types. But there's, Black's always had pretty good mid-range support. So some classic examples, if you remember Pack Rat, the most obnoxious card ever released. There was Liliana the Veil, Phyrexian Plague Lord, the OG rock, and cards like Dark Confidant, Bob that we're getting into standard again. And obviously there's a million modern examples, but Black's been doing this for a very long time with these sort of mid-rangey kind of value creatures. It's classic. One of its most classic identities is Reanimator. So almost all the good Reanimator cards are cards that released in the first few years of Magic's existence. Your Reanimates and your Entombs, your Animate Deads and all that stuff are all very, very old cards. They've sometimes had some bangers throughout the years, though. One that stuck out to me was Whip of Erebos, which, again, if you played during that era of Magic, you would know was a very popular, combo control kind of deck.
Is the reason every tournament went to time is the Whip of Erebos mirror matches where everyone's at 80 life and nobody can die.
Yeah, people were struggling to figure out how do we deal enough damage in one turn to kill you through Whip of Erebos. It got a little wild. Black's a classic Storm support color. Not as much these days. Typically Storm now is more of a blue-red thing, but we do have Darkened Cabal Ritual, all the various tutors, namely there was Demonic Tutor obviously, but then there's the one that works if you're Hellbent, right?
Infernal Tutor.
Yeah, Infernal Tutor was really popular. Tendrils of Agony is one of the...
Is Vampiric still in the Vintage Cube?
Yes, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of random Storm support, either through rituals or tutors or the finisher Tendrils of Agony. You can also lump, so in this next one, you can lump zombies into this as well and probably other archetypes, but the one that jumps to me of the tribal support would be vampires, specifically the card Kalistra Highborn, which was a really popular standard deck for a while. And then recently, and I don't know, I can't remember this being an older thing, but really recently we've been seeing a lot of good black artifact support in the form from Neo onward. We've seen that here and there.
Yeah, that really got started with Kaladesh.
Yeah, War of the Spark was the first time they actually started doing colored artifacts, traditional, true colored artifacts. So that is a very, very new thing to have artifact synergies in specific colors, not necessarily using just straight up colorless artifact stuff.
The first black artifacts card that I remember when I started playing Magic, what was that guy's name who used to come into the game store? He's younger than I am now, but he was older than us at the time. I think he was from the Midwest. He had glasses. He had kind of a manic, sort of excitable vibe to him.
I'm not sure.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. He was really, really, really trying to make a Marionette Master deck functional in that standard, and I think it was pretty clearly tier C. But
Hey, Marionette Master is a sweet card though. As far as the artifact
yes,
stuff
it is
goes.
a very very cool card. And then Kaladesh had some stuff in it. Marionette Master, by the way, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a black 6-drop 1/3 from way back in the day. It has Fabricate 3, so you could bring it in, I guess, as a 4/6, or make 3 1/1 servo tokens. And then whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So you could make it large and then have other ways to sacrifice things to make it really chunk them, or have it be kind of more of a Blood Artisty style effect that brought in 3 of its own bodies. Not a good card by today's standards at all, but it was a very cool design at the time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad Teld mentioned a couple things here. So first off, on the vampire front, going back to that whole Thoughtseize was the only reason black was playable in Cube for like a very long time. I don't know if you guys remember this or how much you played Cube like 10 years ago or now, but there was a time where they were so desperate to figure out something to do with black that they actually seeded Vampire Matters cards into black in the vintage Cube just to try and give it something thematic to do. And it was it was terrible. It was awful.
It was
but like
Abysmatera bad.
Yeah, but black at the time, all it could do was like hymn to Turark Liliana, and if your opponent ever got over the hump of like discard spells, like black just could not keep up with anything else. So the vampire stuff traditionally, you don't see that sort of stuff these days, but it was something they tried to seed back then. And then I also wanted to mention a lot of the cards Teld mentioned, and this is probably why black in, say, the vintage Cube doesn't actually get too many new cards per set, is a lot of the cards Teld just mentioned are best in class cards that were made in early Magic, right? Like, you're just never going to get a better Entomb or a better Reanimate or a better dark demonic tutor or a better vampiric tutor. So like those cards just never go anywhere, and no matter how many times they iterate on them, those will always still just be the best in class cards. So that's probably why black in vintage Cube specifically doesn't really evolve that much. You do get some more mid-rangey threats these days like Grief and Sheoldred, but as far as like the non-creature support, all the board wipes are still as good as they've ever been. Toxic Deluge and stuff like that. All of the cheap kind of combo-esque storm cards and reanimator cards are as good as they've ever been. That stuff like kind of never changes and probably never will. Same thing we said with Thoughtseize, right? We're not getting better Thoughtseize anytime soon.
Did they put Chthonian Nightmare in the vintage Cube?
I think Recurrent Nightmare still waffles around here and there. I don't know if the Chthonian Nightmare made it in or not. Okay, so let's kind of talk about like what is black doing these days? Maybe not necessarily at a cube level, but just on a design level. What is black doing these days that it hasn't always done? And honestly, there's not a lot, right? Black is still very much doing a lot these days as it has always done. I think one thing that jumps out to me is enchantment removal. I don't think we've gotten really a good black enchantment removal spell, like a great one, and I think they're trying to toe the line to make sure they don't print good black enchantment removal so that it doesn't like supersede what white and green can do. But starting with, I think, Zendikar Rising, they printed Feed the Swarm, and then in Duskmourn they printed Wither and Torment, and it's very clear they want black to be a tertiary color at dealing with enchantments, but they don't want it to be super, super powerful at doing that. So it's never really going to affect Cube all that much, but it is something black can do now that it hasn't traditionally done, is disenchants for enchantments specifically. Still can't deal with artifacts.
I'd say give it a little time. I think black's enchantment removal will probably, I think they're going to end up scaling it up like they do most things. I think with Withering Torment, we're probably not that far off from some sort of 2-mana effect that does that. I don't know what the cost would have to be, but I have to imagine we're somewhere.
It's the whole I don't have faith in WotC to not make this as powerful as possible. Like the same thing they did with the red mana dorks when we talked about Tarkir and how they're like, oh, red gets creatures that tap for mana now with no restrictions, and they're like, but we don't want to make it too strong. It's like, no, you're gonna make it too strong. We know how this works, Wizards. We know what you're gonna do.
That's the thing about Cube too, right? Is they only have to do it once. Like, with Constructed, a lot of times they have to do this mistake a couple of times for it to really warp formats. But in Cube, if they do it one time, it's there forever.
Yeah, like Reanimate, for example.
Yeah. Game objects. I think that's a good thing to shout out. Was that Teld? Did you write this down? It's in all caps. I assume you wrote it down.
I did. I did not intend to write it in all caps, but here we are.
Well, You are excited about game objects, so red is intentional to me.
Game objects.
Game objects, yeah. So Grim Bauble is one that sticks out as a recent addition. That's the Disfigure artifact from Aether Drift. So we're starting to see Black get more of this, where they can create cards that they add to the board and leave behind something, and they're also very good at converting those resources. So I think, we should expect to see more of that. Black just, Corpses of the Lost is one that we currently have in the cube that's kind of doing that thing. So there's not a ton in the mainline cube at the moment, but these are cards that all came out in the last year or two, most of the really good ones. So I think we're going to see Black make more game objects that aren't just creatures. And we see a lot of times now, like, for example, in the Final Fantasy set, a lot of the sack effects, Sephiroth specifically doesn't, but a lot of the other sack effects work with artifacts as well. So I think we're seeing that as another sort of thing. So, they'll keep pushing these effects. Just give it time.
They are printing more cards that can sacrifice creatures or artifacts, or trigger off of creatures or artifacts. And I think that's actually a really cool design choice, because generally speaking, at least in Cube, like, your decks that make a shitload of disposable creatures and your decks that make a shitload of disposable artifacts don't really overlap, right? So it's not so much pushing the power of these cards as it is using design space on a single card and opening it up to be potentially cube playable in a couple of different contexts depending on what your cube is doing, which I think is sweet. And I also wanted to shout out, this has been a while now, but when we talk about traditional Black, I think we're talking about going back like a while. This has been a few years now, but I still would put it firmly in the era of kind of modern or contemporary Magic. Blood tokens. Black cards are not the only cards that make blood tokens, but it's pretty heavy into Black, and I think that's a very cool new token type. For those of you unfamiliar, although I doubt anybody really is at this point, you pay 1 mana, tap them, stack them to draw a card and discard a card. Do you discard first, or do you draw first? You discard.
You discard first.
Okay.
I like how Chris says new token Midnight Hunt was like 2021 or something like that. But yeah, more recent than not recent. Or actually, I think blood tokens might have been only Crimson Vow. Is that literally the only time we've seen them as Crimson Vow? It's a shame.
I think that there might have been like one blood token card they slipped into a Modern Horizons set or something, but I don't think so.
I think that they're generic enough that they could bring them back in a different context.
Yeah, I think they would be a cool, like Treasure. I mean, I don't want to see them as much as Treasure, but they're good for limited gameplay too. So like sneak a couple of those in and make it like, what is it called? A deciduous mechanic, when it's not quite evergreen, but it's like they can use it whenever they want. I wouldn't mind seeing blood tokens more. There's like the, what's the 2 mana flyer, 2 mana 2/1 flyer that when a creature dies, you make a blood token.
Voldaren Bloodcaster.
Yeah, and then like it has a transform ability, but it never actually transforms. But that's a cool little card. There's a couple.
Yeah, the one everybody knows is the what is the name of it? The red black 3/2 Blood Tithe Harvester. Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
Yep, Blood Tithe Harvester.
That's the one most people are familiar with because it's been a constructed all-star and still is, I think.
Also, Blood Fountain, if you want to talk about like the overlap of artifacts and game object creation. Like if you're doing anything artifact specific and it touches Black, like Blood Fountain is 2 artifacts for a single mana with some utility later on. I think that's also very heavily played in Peasant, or not Peasant, but Pauper right now because of all the affinity stuff that works by just having artifacts in play, so... Yeah, that'd be something I'd like to see more, but I mean that's kind of like the short list of new Black effects, right? We had a lot more to talk about with White when it came to things like the removal and the stack interaction with things like Reprieve and stuff like that. But as far as like new things that Black is doing, not that much, unless you guys can think of anything outside of the realm of enchantment removal and artifacts matter and a slight bit of game object creation. I can't really peg too much that Black is doing that it hasn't just done for the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, this is probably one of my issues with Black is I think it's an effective color, but I also, for a color that should be able to do more things based on its lore, it does feel like it's a color that's very tight in what its designs are, and so I find it fairly boring.
That's probably good though, right? Like I don't know that. I guess the next big section or last big section here is like, where do we want to see Black go? Like what do we want to see Black do in the future? Like, do you really want to see Black doing a lot of things that the other colors do? Not so much, I don't think, without tampering with the color pie and stuff like that. But I wouldn't quite call Black stagnant, but it definitely does feel samey throughout history. It feels very samey throughout history. So yeah, I guess I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. I'll come back to the R cube specifically, but I guess just to ask the question, like, what would you guys like to see from Black in the future?
That's a good question. I mean, we've already talked about it at length. I do like that they're pivoting away from like pure combo-y, like dies to a stiff breeze, aristocracy stuff, and are making it more of an identity thing on creatures that are can already interact in combat and kind of hold their own. I think that that's how you bring that into the 21st century. It's not really like an evolution of the color, though. That's, I mean, honestly, that's a good question, right? Because like Black does removal, it does sweepers. I would like to see them explore some less ostensibly powerful, more interesting, and like gets over the hump to like mid grade power level on some of their higher costed cards. Because we'll backtrack, but sort of the evolution of Black and RQ. But we've had to cut some of the 4+ drops in Black just because they're so dummy thick. But in terms of new stuff, I mean, a lot of the like power at any cost type stuff, identity to Black was traditionally was really funneled into insane combo stuff that you could do, and I don't think we're going back to that era of design. So not really sure, man. To be totally frank, I mean, one thing. Okay, so one thing I will say, and I'm not saying I want things to go in this direction, but one thing I've kind of always thought about Black and wish that they would do in limited formats is, occasionally they'll make like Black a life gain matters thing. I think that that's a really dog shit archetype design, right? Because it incidentally interacts so directly with aggressive plans that you kind of have to, in order to design it well, you sort of have to like mitigate some of the effects of gaining life to make sure that it doesn't just like dumpster aggro by gaining a bunch of life and also getting a bunch of bonuses on top of that. The problem is that ultimately results in it sucking against controlling decks and mid-range decks that are looking to build up and then kill you, and they don't really care about the fact that you're gaining life, and they just want to execute their game plan and then overwhelm you, right? What I've always kind of thought would be cool in like a Black limited format, if they were going to make it quote-unquote life gain matters, is maybe mitigate some of the benefits of gaining life, like just the raw benefits of gaining life, but then have that mixed in with cards that allow you to spend life to do powerful things, right? Like using the life total as a resource rather than designing cards that are like, if you gained life this turn, make a 1/1. That's not interesting to me. However, the problem is, in my opinion, is that life gain matter stuff is just like, I think as a cube designer, is going to be insanely difficult to balance if you want aggro to be a viable thing in your cube. So it's interesting conceptually, but I don't necessarily think it's a place I want Black to go.
Bloomburrow touched on that a little bit, right? Because the Black white theme was a lot of the bats were like, if you gained and lost life this turn, do blank. And that's kind of like what you're talking about is like, I have the life gain component, but I'm also somehow using my life for something else.
It's murky, though, to make you do them both in the same turn. It's so wonky.
Yeah. Plus, the payoffs in the set weren't good. Like, they're not good cards. So,
right.
It's along the lines, I think, of what you're getting at here.
Yeah. I forgot about that, and you're right. That is in the same kind of ballpark of what I was mentioning. Teld, do you have any thoughts on how we can make Black more interesting?
Greatness at any cost. I'm just saying, like I like when Black pays life to do cool things. I don't know. That's just such an iconically Black thing. Like I wouldn't mind seeing more cards that actually get good rate on that. I don't think reprinting Dark Confidant is the play. But
no.
I would like to see more of these effects stapled to like good cards. That's my thoughts, I think. I mean, it's hard to say because Black manages to simultaneously have a lot of really cool things going on conceptually, but also be really, really boring when it gets played. So, I don't know. Like, I think if I'm looking at like moving forward, there's some cool designs in a lot of the recent sets that give me some hope, but I think they're going to have to expand what Black has been doing, or keep expanding what Black has been doing, so that it's not just removal, aristocracy, life gain stuff. I think they're going to have to actually experiment with some stuff. There's Cecil and the Tonberry from the newest set both kind of interest me. We'll talk more about that next episode, but those are some kind of cards that I think are really interesting and kind of give some hope for that.
Mm-hmm. I was sitting on the couch with my significant other the other day, Morgan, and I asked her, I looked over to her and I was like, do people still say dummy thick these days? And she was like, I don't think so. I don't think anyone says dummy thick anymore. But Chris, thanks for answering that question for me. So,
yeah. Dummy thick.
There are two things that I would like to see from Black. First off, like, where did the Reanimator identity for Black go over the last 10 years? Like, I know I don't want actual Reanimate level cards, but can I get a real playable Reanimator card that's not Abuelo's Awakening bringing back Omniscience? Like,
or like 47 years old?
Yeah, like, Black Reanimator just has not been on the menu, like, as a Black-centric theme, and basically since I've ever played Magic. Like, in the 10 years I've played Magic, it's always been either do the old stuff with the broken things, or do these really sloppy 5-mana Zombify type things for limited, and there's, like, so little in between.
I think they need to do more of like the Dune Drifter, Hero of the Dune stack cards, because they tried to do the Reanimator thing in Duskmourn, but they held their punches so hard because cards like Shroud Stomper, if they're actually good, like think about how much worse Duskmourn would be if Shroud Stomper had ended up being a good card that you reanimated on like turn 3 or 4.
Yeah, and I get it. It's a hard line to toe because like you don't necessarily. I mean, I get it from the designer perspective, right? Like, if people are bringing back Overlord of the Mistmoors on turn 3 consistently and constructed, like, you have a problem. But, like, there's got to be some wiggle room to 4-mana Zombifies or something like that. Like, they brought Zombify back in Foundations, but literal Zombify? Like, come on. Give me something better than that.
Yeah. Well, dude, I'm so glad that you brought this up. I don't know why I blanked on it so completely before like writing notes on this episode, because I've literally said it in year-end, retrospectives, like what would you like to see from Black this year? I've literally said exactly that. I would love to see that element of Black designed in such a way where it is a mid-range game plan, not a combo game plan. The problem is, like, do you remember they did Blue-Black Reanimator as the limited archetype? I think it was an Ikoria. Was it that long ago? I think it was an Ikoria.
Maybe.
Because they had some like big creatures that could cycle themselves or whatever. I think the problem is, like you said, every time they decide that they're going to try to do a contemporary play on Reanimator, it feels like they're terrified not to play it super safe, which is understandable, right? Like at what mana level and in what capacity. Right. When do you bleed from mid-range to combo, and when is that combo obnoxious? Sometimes it feels like with these reanimation cards, the problem is like, and you guys tell me if this doesn't make any sense, but sometimes it feels like the way that you would want to cost reanimation effects fairly is like X and a half mana cards. Mm-hmm. It's like at 1 it's too expensive, 1 less mana it's too cheap, but you can't pay 2.5 mana for an effect. Does that make any sense? Like, I feel like that's where they're struggling, is that it feels like there's like a razor's edge on it. My viewpoint has always been the best way to do it would be to print relatively like cost-effective reanimation cards, but like put a cap on the mana value of the thing that you can recur. Didn't they put out a card that it was like 4 mana reanimate anything, or 3 mana reanimate something that costs 3 or less, or something like that?
The card you're thinking of is No One Left Behind, I think is the name of it. It was from Brothers War, so it's 5. It's a black and 4 to reanimate anything, and it's 1 and a black to reanimate something that costs 3 or less.
So yeah, like maybe printing something that's like Zombify, but for like 2 or more. But for like 2 mana, you can reanimate like a 4-drop. Like that might be pushed, but like Zombify to reanimate something insane. So you're not really getting away with a whole lot from like a combo perspective. Or for 2 mana, you can reanimate like a good engine creature or something cheaper, right? Because it still has to go in your graveyard, right? You still have to do that work. Something like that. They haven't found it yet.
All right, so wiggle room on Reanimator. Obviously, like, just to demonstrate toe in the line, if they printed a sorcery that was 2 and a black, return a creature from graveyard to the battlefield, 2 strong, right? but Zombify for 1 additional mana too weak. so like again,
I don't know. Like is 3 mana reanimate something up to 6 MV too strong?
Well, if you put a cap on it, sure, you might be able to get away with it. But like if it was literally just 2 and a black sorcery, and bring anything back to the grave battlefield, like you would just see turn 3 Atraxas and stuff like that pretty consistently, just to demonstrate the point of like the difference between having a reanimator spell at 3 mana and a Zombify at 4 mana being like bad. Like that middle ground, that 3.5 mana feels like the sweet spot, but you can't get that. So the thing we're asking for with better reanimator cards is not necessarily achievable or easy for people to design.
Yeah, one thing that, now that you're talking about it, one thing that could avoid some of these problems is something in the vein of like Dread Return's design. Not necessarily that card itself, but Dread Return, for if you haven't been playing for a while, so it's like 4 mana Zombify, but as flashback, sack 3 creatures. So the idea, and this isn't exactly how it's used in Constructed, but the idea is that you're playing a creature deck and you get to use it to cash in to bring back like a better creature or a value creature. So it's not necessarily sacking things, but like a reanimation spell that in order to get good value out of it, you needed to like maybe have creatures in play in order to get cheaper mana values out of it.
It's like Blood for Bones type thing.
Yeah, like a Blood for Bones type thing, except maybe pushed a little harder for maybe like Constructed. That way you're not like turboing out Atraxa, right? Because the Atraxa decks tend to be very creature light, or at least it would force them to get really weird in their builds, I think.
Well, Tim, you had an excellent idea a while back.
Yeah,
like,
Decayed token. That's exactly what
the Decayed. Yeah. Give me the Decayed thing.
Exactly what I was gonna say. I always thought they could print a really like cheap reanimator spell, 2 or 3 mana, that just was blanket reanimator, but the creature came back decayed or something like that. And in fact, we can see that they can literally use a decayed counter now, which they did on the Rakshasa thing from Tarkir. So like maybe 2 mana is still just like too cheap to bring back an Atraxa, even if it is decayed, but like at 2 and a black or something like that, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, it's decayed or it has a decayed counter, I think would be a great balancing tool, because then your Atraxa is not just like bricking your opponent in combat on top of doing whatever broken, ETB stuff it's doing. So
I guess it would still be problematic with a number. So like, I'm not proposing this as like necessarily a well-designed card. It was just like an idea that I had. I was thinking of like a reanimator card, and like sort of the flavor of it would be like, it was like animated by like dancing with worms or something. Like basically like the idea is you reanimate the thing, right? So it gets its ETB, but it's basically like tossing a corpse out of like a casket, right? Like the second it hits the battlefield, you sacrifice it, and then you get like a number of 1/1 tokens equal to like half of its toughness rounded down or something. So you could like re-abuse like a big ETB ability, but then what's left over, you get something left over, but it's not like...
Yeah, so like we draw like 5 cards and get some 1/1 worms?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how you would balance it. Maybe you would make like the number of worms that you get like fixed, like 2 1/1 tokens or something. But the idea would be, you reanimate it, you get the ETB ability, or whatever its ability is, that you can activate an instant speed while the sacrifice thing is on the stack, like Croak stuff.
All right, I got it. It's called Pest Incubation, and it's it's gonna be that except you get 3 pest tokens or something, or you get pest tokens equal to, I don't know, it could be mana spent or the power toughness, whatever, and we're just gonna play off pest infestation.
Yeah. Something like that. So I always thought that was a cool idea. I don't know how exactly you would tune it, but yeah, I think I also like Tim's Decayed idea. Like it comes back, but it's decayed.
Yeah, I like the black reanimation ideas. Those are very cool.
So you saw it with Persist too, right? Persist is 1 in a black, bring a creature back, non-legendary creature with a -1 counter, and that didn't break anything. So I guess the only other thing I would say as far as like where can black go from here, I was really kind of caught off guard by how good Quag Feast has been in the mainline cube. That's the Ether Drift card that's 1 in a black, mill 2 cards, and then give or destroy a vehicle, creature, or maybe planeswalker 2 with mana value equal to or less than the number of cards in your graveyard. It always plays as though it's 2 mana, kill a creature at sorcery speed, but it does mill you a little bit, so it has a little bit of graveyard synergy. And I think if we're not going to push Doomblades to be actually just better than Infernal Grasp or Bitter Triumph, like finding more thematic Doomblades I think would be really cool as far as like black removal, making black removal like do interesting things with other themes and archetypes. I think would be another thing I want to see for the future. But that's a lot smaller and probably a lot easier to do than balance and Reanimator for constructed formats in 2025 or whatever. So, Christy, you want to talk a little bit about the evolution of black in R Cube specifically?
Yeah, and I'll run through it quick because we're going long. But basically, when the cube first started, we were playing really terrible sweepers. So that's thing number one, is we finally have good sweepers. We actually even went so far as to cut Toxic Deluge because it was just so obnoxious. We started out with like Crux of Fate.
Languish, Crux of Fate, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Languish is still fine. But yeah, so the sweepers have gotten a lot better. The removal has gotten better. Where the big change has been is the creatures have just gotten a shitload better. One of the things that I'm going to talk about in a second that we removed is pretty old. We ended up removing some of our, what I like to call invalidating top end, like cards that come down and it basically does not matter what already happened. Like you're going to lose to this. Grave Titan is one of them. Even if you instantly remove it, your opponent is still up a Call the Cavalry, 2/2/2 tokens. That's pretty wild trade. Stabilizes like crazy, beats your opponent to death. It's just an insane card, right? Everybody knows that. And then there is Aclazotz, which we have talked a lot about on the pod, but it's been a while, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. I was actually worried this card wasn't going to be good enough because it didn't have a 5th point of toughness, which is insane in retrospect. Aclazotz is 3 black for 4/4 flying lifelink. Whenever it attacks, each opponent discards a card. For each opponent who can't, you draw a card. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, you make a 1/1 black bat creature token. So, like, if they don't discard a real card, you make a flyer. And then if it dies, it turns into a land, and you can recur it later. So it's nearly impossible to get rid of. The lifelink on this thing is what really pushes it into insane territory. Your aggro opponent's just going to have a really bad time with this. I love the art. This is maybe my favorite black creature art of all time, but we don't play it anymore. We already touched on it's less sack dependent now, and there's a lot more stuff that's like powerful as an attacking card, but also has sack synergy stuff. Like Lord Skitter, for example, is a 3/3 that every turn pre-combat, you exile something from a graveyard, you make a 1/1 rat creature token that can't block. This is obviously excellent with wood chipper cards like Yawgmoth, but it also just, those tokens add up over time as just ways to just toss damage at your opponent. We've also, the 1-drops have gotten a lot better. We've cut like all of the crappy quote unquote recursive creatures unless they're just like insane at doing it, right? Black has been pushed a lot more in the direction of things like Jadar and Lord Skitter, stuff that like Ophiomancer, things that just churn out bodies every turn. Gutterbones is gone, Cult Conscript is gone, Dread Wanderer is gone. We basically just found that anything that wants you to pay mana to recur a 2/1 from the graveyard is just not a good use of your time. We've even cut Tenacious Underdog, which I still think is a fine card, but it's just not great anymore. We did get an Alchemy card, and as much as I hate to see an Alchemy card in the list, because I hate Alchemy, they printed a 1-drop in this vein that is exactly what it needs to be, which is it's a 2/1 that enters tap like Gutterbones, except that when it dies, it just comes back for free. And it only does that one time, but like I can't remember ever recurring Gutterbones more than once. Right.
Yeah, this card they could have printed in paper and give it a finality counter. It would actually be a stronger card, and no one would have batted an eye, to be clear.
Yeah, 100%. Like, this is where this kind of thing needs to be. But those cards have been replaced by things like Iridescent Vinelasher, which is an offspring card that damages your opponent off of landfall. Stalactite Stalker, which grows off of Descending, which you can do either by like milling or discarding or losing a creature in combat. Knight of the Ebon Legion came back way back in M20. And is still an excellent black aggro card.
Don't forget Nethergoyth if we're going high power here.
Oh yeah, well there's also Nethergoyth, which I don't want to talk about.
I don't think Nethergoyth is particularly egregious. I think it's just really good stats on rate and like.
Yeah, that's what I don't like about as far as like being big power for 1 mana.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of the recursive type creatures, really what we have left at this point is the stuff that basically does it for free or can do it repeatedly in one turn. Like Bloodsoaked Champion I think is still pretty good because you can just do it multiple times per turn, right? If you have a sack outlet and you don't have anything else to do with your mana, I think that's still good. And then like Bloodghast is still good, but also notably Bloodghast comes back for free.
We were talking, we were just talking about designs and stuff, and like one card that we thought about doing the single card discussion on, but there wasn't a ton to say, was Deep Cavern Bat, and that's actually a card I wouldn't mind seeing more swings at this style of effect that are sort of like disruptive mid-range creatures that are more tempo oriented, right? So like the bat is super obnoxious, but once you kill it, you get your card back. Like we've seen some things like this in the past with stuff like what was the name of it? Gelatinous Ooze, I think, is the card from AFR that like ate a creature, but but you could get it back if you killed the ooze before they had time to digest it or something. I would like to see them take a few more swings at these style of effects, as I think they're really fun. Maybe not necessarily just killing creatures, or just like we saw Pitiless Plunder was, I don't know, not Pitiless Plunder. What was the card from the big score that it like made a bunch of dudes and then gained you a bunch of life and drew you a bunch of cards.
The Gambit, the Greed's Gambit or whatever.
Yeah, Greed's Gambit. I think that's the one. I would like to see more of these cards. Like for example, a card that when it enters you draw a card, and then when it dies you discard a card, right? Something like that, where you're leveraging these sort of black-based temporary advantages. I think that could be kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Cavern Bat, very simple, very clean design. I heard on
All-Star.
I heard on a podcast somebody was talking about how much better Kitesail Freebooter is in this card, and that's insane. Everything about that statement is insane.
To be fair, I think a lot of us, ourselves included, missed this card in our initial reviews because, one, you don't realize how relevant 1 point of lifelink is until you're actually playing the card. And then two, I don't think, like, for example, I kind of defaulted to the Kitesail Freebooter text, and this card gets anything. Now, normally you do get a non-creature card, but you can get a creature, and that's a big upgrade. So, like, I think it was a reasonable take when it came out that people missed how good this card would end up being. Like, I don't think anybody, even its most optimistic people, probably thought that it was going to be, like, Vintage Cube playable.
No. I mean,
sure. No, I thought the Deep Cavern Bat was a fine card. I didn't think it was a great card, but I didn't think it was nearly as good as it actually is.
Yeah.
But I still disagreed with the statement at the time because we had played Kitesail Freebooter, and Kitesail Freebooter is just not very good.
Sure. That specific one. Yeah, I just meant, like, I think it's a really easy card to undervalue how good this card was going to end up being.
Oh, for sure. I underestimated it too. I just, at the time, like I said, I was like, okay, well, this card doesn't have to be very good to be better than Kitesail Freebooter because that card's not very good. That's mostly what's changed. We've also cut Yawgmoth, which hurt me to do, and it took me too long to come around on we need to do this, but we eventually did. And then the last thing I wanted to note is Dimir Midrange is doing stuff in our cube right now. Blue, flashy, tempo type creatures that like flyers combined with like black removal. Some other versions of it are going a little bigger and just playing like some of Black's best creatures and topping off with Time Warp and Scarab God.
There's also a secret blue-black Thopter Fabricator deck that, like, it's and I know it's like kind of a joke, but that Carbon is like drafting this day in, day out for the mainline queue, but like the little package of Mystic plus Thopter Fabricator and control spells and draw spells actually kind of works pretty well. That card tends to be a win condition of its own for these mid-range control style decks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think these decks are cool. Chris and I played with a much more, like, we were kind of all in tempo when we drafted our version of this deck. We were like very much trying to kill people quickly, but we've been seeing people move in the blue-black specifically in a much more like trying to actually get around to ending the game relatively quickly. Whereas it feels like the blue-white decks when they see play, or the Jeskai decks when they see play, are much more on the like do Quintorius dumb stuff and go way bigger than you could ever possibly go.
Now, I guess I would ask how much of the blue-black decks that we're seeing, do you think they are blue-heavy with black as support or vice versa, or do you think it's actually just an even split of like this is a Dimir deck where both colors are pulling their weight?
I think you can just see, like, I mean, the lists we have pulled up here, they're all blue decks, like, fundamentally. I think you can make the case that black is an important color here, right, for the removal. But they're, like, the one of these has got, like, 5 black cards in the whole list, and the other one has, like, 6.
I think that's the way you're going to see it too, right? Because like the black cards that support the blue plan support it well. But if you're going to go like 80% black, you're going to be an aggressive deck with some drainy type elements, and there just aren't many blue cards that support that, right? So I think the nature of this deck, I think this deck by its very nature is going to be like 70-30, like blue black, and in some case, I mean, like one of these is just a blue deck with some black cards. The other thing that I kind of like about this is we put Rafine in the cube, and it's been popular. Nicol Bolas somehow magically from M19 is still a pretty good card. So you can splash a little white or a little red in there to add some other goodies to the deck. And this one deck that Doug drafted is actually doing both at the same time off the back of some fetches.
Mm-hmm. I think I could also see a green splash for the Gitrog monster is just like a big tempo finisher creature or something like that. Not sure how good that ends up being, but I could definitely see like that. Repulsive Mutation's a card that I can't ever say no to. I think there's some splashes you can make in these decks, but I think the core of them tend to be more blue heavy, but I think right now in our cube, any deck that's playing blue tends to be a base blue deck. It's not all of them aren't that way, but it is more common than not outside of maybe like is more of a red deck, and like Simic is kind of, or Bant is kind of like a 50-50 split deck. But I think the Esper side of our cube I think tends to be very blue heavy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, blue has its own. It has such a firm plan that it's really looking for support. I do think you can play like a really heavy green deck that is playing some counter spells. I think that is an underdrafted way to play Simic, just because we've talked about this in the podcast before. Like, you can ramp into one giant play per turn, or you can ramp into like, here's my 4-drop that will kill you, and also I'm going to hold up like Memory Lapse. Bad example, we don't play Memory Lapse anymore. But generally speaking, yeah, I think blue, if you're going to play blue, it's going to be at least 50% of the cards in your deck most of the time. Mm-hmm. But that's a separate color.
For sure.
Yeah, it is funny because like these episodes really, we talked about them beginning with the white, but if we really think about it, way back a million years ago, we did an episode called Blues Got the Blues.
That's true, yeah.
It doesn't anymore.
And yeah, blue does not, in fact, have the blues anymore. It's quite happy.
The funny thing about that episode is some of the theoretical card designs that we mentioned there actually kind of happened like shortly thereafter. So if you've got any pitches for things you really want to see here for black, like maybe just throw them out there. And
no, seriously, send us a message, pitch us a card design. We'll say it on air. It will come into being. It's also kind of funny that like all the stuff that we were like, please give us this for blue, they did it, and then they went like way overboard and made it so good that we can't play it.
Yeah, now blue is the best aggro color in the cube as well. It's like, oh my god, what? No, calm down, hold on, you misunderstood.
Malcolm goes in every deck. What?
Stoic Sphinx, 5-power flyer, flash, hexproof, can't interact. Cool. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap there on black. So the evolution of black, just a little bow on it, hasn't changed that much. Some of the individual cards and stuff have gotten stronger, but as far as like what it's doing as a support color in Magic, primary color in Magic, hasn't changed too much over time. That said, we'll say to the listener, remember to find us on Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming, and find Teld streaming on Twitch.tv/TeldTalks. Next episodes, we're going to be doing Final Fantasy reviews. We'll talk about Sephiroth a little bit more there. It might actually be the only card we talk about. Actually, exaggeration. I can think of one or two other cards, but...
Have they previewed Squall yet? I'm sure they have, and I'm sure it's bad.
They have. It's quite bad. I mean, it's a cool card, but quite bad.
Yeah, it's a mid-rangey, flavor-forward kind of black-white aggro card. 4-drop that cares about attacking alone type thing.
Okay.
My favorite thing is some of the stuff that you don't see just in the initial spoiler pictures. Like, for example, there's Sid in the set, but there's not just one art for Sid. There's 16 or 15 Sids because he's been in every Final Fantasy except for the first one. Oh,
they're nailing it on flavor, but as far as playable cards, there really aren't that many. I like the Wrath. I like the 5-mana Wrath, but we'll save it for next episode. We'll do our mainline cube review episode as episode 46, and then I think we're going to get Danelius on, and Danelius also didn't seem like he was too jazzed about the peasant stuff, which he's normally sending us cards left and right that he's interested in talking about. So maybe, just maybe, we'll have some shorter set reviews, and I won't have to spend 20 hours of the week editing both of those, but we'll see. There's still like a good 100 so cards to go. We haven't seen Omega Weapon. There's got to be an Omega Weapon somewhere in the set, right? Like,
have we not seen the ultimate weapon or whatever?
I don't know. We saw the Buster Sword over the weekend. That was kind of cool, but not really playable for Cube. So yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it more with our kind of initial thoughts on the set next week, and everything that we think is like super highly cubable. So stay tuned for Final Fantasy previews. Thanks for hanging out and talking about some black cards, and we will see you all next time.
All right. Do you have a sign off?
Yeah, I don't want to go super long, but I've got Chris on the episode, and there's been a kind of like short Magic story I wanted to share with Chris specifically because he didn't get to see it. So if you've got like 3 or 4 minutes,
I do.
Okay, so this is coming from a roto draft that we did a while back now, like almost 2 months now. It was Mop Beeble's Timeless Cube. And I had such a rough like work month that I kind of really didn't put too much thought into my deck or anything while I was roto drafting. So I just kind of drafted like control slop with good cards. But I was playing against Doug, which is why this story is great, because you can just kind of like peg his reaction to this match. But he was on white green aggro, like a Johnny, Ocelot Pride, Guide of Souls, like just the dream white aggro deck with like green ramp and stuff like that. And I managed to just like sunfall him out of the game match 1, right? So, which is bogus because he was just like completely stomping me, and I sunfalled him. But in our game 2, and mind you, he's like super heavily favored. I had this sequence where I played maybe Teld can help with the name of the card, Geist Channeler or something like that. It's an alchemy card that makes an expensive. Yeah, it makes an expensive card in your hand 2 mana less to cast perpetually. So it hit my Sunfall, right? So my Sunfall costs 3 mana for the game. Doug is just like, for the entire game, he's like, oh, please don't Sunfall me. Like, there's no way it hits Sunfall. You don't have Sunfall in your hand for 3 mana. Like, Sunfall's such a broken card, blah, 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 blah. And anyway, like,
and he's playing the broken. He's purposely playing the broken cube.
Yeah.
Right?
So what's funny about it is I did have Sunfall. I didn't have to use it right away, but he had this really sweet turn where he had Delny on board, which doubles the abilities of your 2 power creatures, and he played Skyclave Apparition, and he got to snag 2 of my dudes and start like beating down, right? And I sunfalled him next turn, so of course he's just like, oh, he had the sunfall, blah, blah, blah. But the funny thing about that is, I don't know if you know this, but Skyclave Apparition doesn't normally exile 2 creatures. It normally exiles 1. But if you, the way it works is if you have multiple creatures underneath your Skyclave Apparition, it adds their total mana value together for the token your opponent makes. So,
oh my god!
Yeah, so I had a total of 5 mana underneath Skyclave Apparition. So I sunfalled his board. Skyclave Apparition made me a 5/5, but it gets better because Delny copies the ability of Skyclave Apparition when it leaves the battlefield too. So I sunfalled him for 3 mana. I killed his board. I made 2 5/5s immediately and had the sunfall token left behind to just like completely crush him. And you can.
Oh my god!
Oh god! I'm just
exactly.
Reaction. Oh my god!
Not only is the interaction just super convoluted and sweet, but like the fact that it was Doug specifically, you can just kind of like you can like put words in his mouth for when that happens.
Hey guys, can I interest you in a 3 mana Wrath that makes 2 5/5 tokens?
And the fabric and the
sunfall token.
Yeah, it was god. Absolutely beautiful. I did so terrible during that roto like round of events, but that match win was so sweet.
I'm sure that made the whole thing worth it. That's
fantastic. Hey guys, be right back. I'm adding a card to the admin doc to talk about bringing it back.
The funny thing about it too is Delny and Skyclave Apparition were in our cubes at the same time, and I don't think I ever saw the like double death trigger on Skyclave Apparition. It's like such a backfire moment for those cards.
God, that's amazing.
Oh
I like everything about that story. There's not one element of it that I don't like.
I've been saving that one up for an outro for you.
It's very considerate. You're a good friend, Tim.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to episode 1 of Bad Takes. I'm your host, Timothy Zaccanino, and on today's episode, we're talking about cutting lands in Commander. That's right, folks. You're playing too many lands in your Commander decks. Conventional wisdom says 36 to 38 lands as a standard, but I'm here to tell you that big mana has been lying to you. First off, playing more lands means less spells, and the whole reason you're playing Commander is to play the cool cards, right? Why waste all those precious slots on mana when you can be playing Haymakers and Battle Cruisers? Second off, you're not using the power of Rule Zero to your advantage enough. If you can persuade your podmates to partial Paris or mulligan into keepable hands, you can just keep sending back land-light hands until you get one with enough lands to operate. Look, folks, Rule Zero is made to be taken advantage of. Wizards just doesn't want you to know that. And don't forget the best part about a low land count. If you miss a land drop, you can prey on the pity of your opponents to leave you alone and attack other players. In fact, if you're against a pod full of aggressive commanders, I highly recommend missing your second land drop on purpose to get those early pity points. Weaponize the empathy of weak-willed players and use Mana Screw to your advantage. And one more secret that pro Commander players don't want you to know. Avoid playing utility lands or non-basics. A mana base strictly composed of basic lands is less complex and cumbersome, and will open your mind up to processing the effects in play that really matter. The more text you have in play at any given time, the harder it is to play optimally. Finally, to leave you all off today, consider running more mass land destruction in your decks. Brackets be damned, mass land destruction causes opponents to scoop more often than not, which in turn means more games of Magic being played. Worldfire and Sway of the Stars are top 10 staples for a reason, and if you're trying to test out a new deck as much as possible, these should be some of the first cards you add into that deck. Alright folks, that's it for today. Join me next time when we talk about Mana Curve and cutting all the cheap, boring cards out of your deck. This has been Timothy with Bad Takes, signing off.